Hey everybody, coming to you from, well, hopefully a familiar place. This is our youth room. And so a little bit of a change of venue for tonight. I happen to be here and I happen to be cleaning up and doing some things, so I decided to go ahead and video the lesson. Anyways, let's get right into it. Matthew chapter 22, verse 34 through 40 is where we're going to be. So as we're going through this, I am going to ask a few questions, and as always, I'll pause and give you an opportunity to think about it for yourself. If you want to write down your answers in the comments, feel free. I'm checking comments every time I upload a video, so hopefully I don't miss you. Anyways, but Matthew chapter 22, verse 34 through 40 says this: "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him." The him is Jesus. "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." Now, we're going to deal mostly with this first commandment tonight, and next week we'll be talking about the second commandment. But let's go ahead and look at this first commandment, because it says to love God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind. So what is loving God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind? Or rather, put it differently, what does that mean? And we're going to take this each section at a time. And so we have 3 different sections we're going to look at. And so let's look at the first one here. What does it mean to love God with all of your heart? And so go ahead and ask yourself that question. Pause for a minute, and if you want to, write down the answer that you feel in the comments. So what does it mean to love God with all of your heart? Well, let's look at this. Our heart is kind of our emotion. It's not talking about the physical beating heart that we know and love from anatomy. What we're talking about is the idea of emotion. Our emotions are where we're at. So it's kind of like this. If I were not with you, which I'm not right now, I could still show you love. I could still have love for you, because even though my body is absent, my emotions are still there. And so I can tell you about the love that I have for you. I can show it to you. I can do all sorts of different things. But that emotion is with me, even when I'm not with you. So it's kind of, if we're absent in body, it can still be present in spirit. So I'm 2,300 miles away from my mom, and most of my family, honestly. But I know that they love me. That emotion is still there. And so when we talk about emotion, we're talking about this emotion that we have. That heart is the emotion. And so let's look at this. We're all aware of our emotions, right? I'm assuming everybody's nodding their head right now. If you're not, you might want to become aware that you are an emotional person, or an emotional being, however you want to put that. But sometimes people carry their emotions on the surface. We talk about wearing your heart on your sleeve. Sleeve. And so that's someone who has their emotions close to the surface. But there are others who have their emotions a little deeper inside them. They're not necessarily prone to emotional outbursts. They're not necessarily prone to showing signs of emotions, things like that. And so we have, on different levels, we have emotion. It doesn't matter where we keep them, we all have them. And so as we look at this, we all understand what emotions are and what that means. When it says we love God with all of our heart, with all of our emotion, with all the love that we have within us, all the emotion that we have. So the question is, how do we do that? And so go ahead and take another second pause here and write down in the comments, how do we love God with all our heart? So how do we love God with all of our emotions, all of our heart? Well, if you want an answer for that, I have a different question for you. And so this is the question: how do you grow to love anyone? Think about it for a moment. How do you grow to love somebody? I mean, yeah, growing up, I seem to have loved my family. I didn't always like them, but I always loved my family. So that may not be the best way for me to try and figure out, okay, how do I grow to love somebody? But then I had friends. I had one friend, a guy named James, who I met in college. And the first time I met him, well, he was kind of crazy. He had just driven to Virginia from Georgia. He was on a caffeine high like nobody's business. And I walk into our student center at the school, and I look over, and there's this guy with this massive white boy fro that's going everywhere, and he's all over the place. And next thing I know, I look over, and he's going, woo! Like really high pitched, really loud. And then he runs over to the couch, and he jumps over the back of the couch and kind of like bounces in the couch, like, yeah! And I have no clue why he was going to the couch. We didn't have a TV. But anyways, he went over there and he jumped on the couch, and I'm like, anybody else see this guy? I walked over to my other friends, a guy named Byron. I said, who is this guy? But I got to know him. I sat down on the couch. Once he chilled out a little bit, I sat down with him and I talked to him, and I got to know him a little bit. Matter of fact, he and I went to church together. Another matter of fact, I got him his first job in Virginia when he was looking for one. And so we worked together. We went to church together. We lived down the hall from each other. And at one point, we actually rented an apartment together as well. But he became a good friend. And how did I get to love this guy as a friend? Well, I got to know him. I started talking to him. I spent time with him. I hung out with him. I did these things, and we got to know each other, and we kind of, built a relationship, built a friendship. And so I would say now, even though, it's been years since college and he lives on the other side of the country, I still love the guy. He's like one of my brothers, even though not biologically. And so we learn to love by growing with a person, by learning about them, seeing what they've done for us, see what we do for them, all these things. And loving God with all of our emotions, the same thing. We get to know him. I'm going to keep moving on, but that's the idea there. That's how we love him more. That's how we can love him with all our heart. The better we know him through his word and deeds, the easier it is to love him. The next thing is this. I want to skip over and go to mind, because it's our heart, soul, and mind. But I want to skip over soul for a second, go to mind. And so the question, once again, is, what does that mean? What does it mean to love God with all of our mind? I gave you an opportunity to pause and write down your answer. I look forward to seeing them. But let's look at this. What does it mean to love God with our mind? Well, our mind is our intellect. It's our thoughts, the processes of our mind. It's how we think. And so, honestly, this has got to be the hardest part of loving God, for me at least. I can control my thoughts to a certain extent, but I can't always control them. Many of you who have been in lessons that I've taught know that I have a tendency to, shall I say, follow rabbits. Shiny things distract me, and I go after them. I go down that path. And so sometimes it's hard for me to control my mind. Sometimes things pop into my mind that I have no clue where that came from. But the fact of the matter is, for the most part, when I'm conscious of what's going on, I can't control my mind to some extent. But before I know what's happening, sometimes I'll be working on a lesson, I'll be focusing on something, and all of a sudden a thought pops in my head, and before long, I've been Googling for an hour trying to figure out why it is that Captain America's shield can defy the laws of physics. And I have to catch myself. What am I doing? I got to get back to this. I got to focus on what I'm doing. But we tend to do that. The Bible actually warns about this as well. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, talks about telling us to take captive our thoughts, to take control over our thoughts, to rein them in at times. And sometimes we have problems with our thought life, where we're thinking about things that aren't good. Now, I'm not saying if something pops into your head, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? That's not necessarily bad when you're trying to push it away and get away from it and stop that thought from continuing. But when you indulge in it, when you revel in it, when you spend your thoughts and your intentions in that idea, then yeah, we start committing sin and things like that. And that's why it's hard to control what we think about. The question becomes then, how do we love God with all of our mind? So if we're going to love God with all our mind, we have to start training our mind. a lot of times the things that pop into our heads randomly aren't really that random. It's usually something that we put into our mind beforehand, something that we've indulged in, or something that we've thought about, or something that we've gone through, and that comes back up in our minds. It may be a smell or a sound or a sight that brings it back to memory. But the idea here is that we put these things in our mind, and it's time to replace those with something that's good. A verse that my mom used quite a lot when I was a kid was Philippians 4, verse 8. If she didn't like the music I was listening to, she would say, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are pure, think on these things. And I agree with her. Now, because I see the benefit of those. I see the benefit of thinking of the things that are good. Philippians 4:8 says this, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." And so it's one of these things where we replace those things that we put in. All those things that are popping up that we like, man, where did that come from? It's because we've looked at things. We've thought about things. We've listened to things that are bringing this back into memory. So we try to replace those with something that's good, something that's pure, something that's wholesome. This verse is not just a great verse for parents to say, you shouldn't be listening to that, or you shouldn't be watching that. It's also a great guide for us to strengthen our minds. Strengthen our minds and strengthen our lives. If we can master this guide, we can master our thoughts as well. And when we can master our thoughts, we can love God with all of our minds. When we bring our minds into subjection or reining them in, bringing them under control, we can direct it where it needs to go. And the more positives that we put into it, the easier it is for positive things to pop up in our minds rather than the negatives. So, bringing our mind in control, focusing by putting good things in, helps us to love God with all of our mind. The last thing is this. It's loving God with all of our soul. The idea here, pause. What does it mean to love God with all of our soul? Unpause. So, it's the idea of will, our actions. Actions taken or not taken by our bodies. It's our will, our desire, what makes us do the things that we do is the idea, the actions that we take. And so to me, this way of loving God seems to be the easiest, at least in theory. We can control our actions, right? I'm sure there's somebody out there that's nodding, no, I can't. And that's fine, I understand that. But I can control my actions. If I want ice cream, I go get ice cream. If I want a cup of water, I go get a cup of water. When I was younger, if I wanted a cup of water, I'd call my sister and say, hey, can you give me a cup of water? Sorry, not call, but call. But I can do those things. I can control my actions. The fact that my hand is opening and closing right now is controlled by me. I control the action. And so in theory, this is the easier one because we can control it. But we don't always control our actions. So if the meaning is action or controlling our actions, how do we do that then? How do we control our actions and love God through it? And so I ask you that question. How do we use our will to show that we love God? When it's time for action, we choose to align our will with that of God's. This is how we show His love. Or this is how we show that we love God through our soul, our will, our actions. And so this will is informed by both our emotions and our intellect, though. Now, this can be a problem. Because I said before, I can control my actions. But there are times where I don't. And that's usually when one of these two things is out of balance. If my emotions are controlling my actions, then I may not be thinking about what I'm doing, and therefore I have less control over what I'm doing. Now, if I'm only thinking about what I'm doing, I may not think about the emotional impact of what I'm doing, and I come off as a jerk, which is not showing love. And so I can use my facts and my logics and my mind, my thinking, my processes to do my actions. And so in that case, I am in control, but yet I'm not showing love through them. What we need to do is make sure that our emotion and our mind, our heart and our mind, are in balance. Because when I'm thinking through something logically, my heart doesn't take over and my emotions don't run away with me. But when I'm thinking about something logically, sometimes I do not think about what it will do to someone else. So my emotions have to come in and temper my logic, and my logic should temper my emotions. The more we do this, the more control over what we do we have. So if we want to show God's love through this, this is what we need to do. When we can get our emotions and our thoughts to work together, it's easier for us to get our actions in line. And our actions are proof of what our heart feels and what our mind thinks. When Jesus says that we should love God with all of our heart, our soul, and our mind, what he's really saying is that the love we have for God cannot be split into one part of our lives. It can't be split into one part and not the others. We need to love God with our whole being. Love should not be compartmentalized. It should be allowed to overflow into every area of our lives. And so, this is my last question for you. Or, well, two questions. Are you limiting your love for God? Or are you allowing it to fill you? I love you guys. I'm hoping that we'll be together again soon. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to close. Father, we thank you for all that you do. We just pray that you would be with us right now. Help us to live lives that show your love. Lord, that mind, soul, and heart all come together, and we're able to love you with our whole being, not just parts, not just the words we say, not just with the actions we do on Sunday, but Lord, our whole lives will be used to love you. We ask in your Son's name and thank you. Amen.